千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Eric Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Let's get back into chapter 49 to complete our discussion on 49. So what did we talk about last time? We went through 49 in a few meetings, and we began, as we always do, with an analysis of the different sections. In this particular one, we found instead of 3 sections, 4 sections. We were able to talk about these lines one at a time, and we were able to get to the very last line. The very last line that we talked about summarizes the 2 main points in this chapter. What it says is that the sages care for them as children. Them is a reference to the people. Now, this line summarizes to the 2 major points of this chapter: the virtue of goodness, which you will find in line 5. So line 5 is part of the second section, as you can see here, lines 3, 4, and 5 that talk about the virtue of goodness. And the other major point is the virtue of belief. That comes from line 8. And line 8, as you can see, is part of the third section that includes lines 6, 7, and 8. So the emphasis of this particular chapter, if I can pull out those 2 sections to talk about, to kind of focus on them, there's the virtue of goodness, and the character for goodness can also be translated as kindness. As you can see there, there's the corresponding characters with the translations, all ending with the virtue of goodness, 3, 4, and 5. All of those are speaking to that one virtue. And then 6, 7, and 8, all 3 lines focus on the virtue of belief. So it's important to note that the virtue of goodness and the virtue of belief are the 2 primary components of what we call De Xing, which is the virtuous character of a real-life sage. It's a way to assess whether or not someone really understands and practices the Tao. A person who does both, understands and practices, is a real-life sage and would effortlessly be able to exude, demonstrate, and influence other people this virtuous character, 德性. And it includes the virtue of goodness and the virtue of belief. And as you can see with just the words, this particular person, a living sage, practicing the virtue of goodness will be good to all, whether or not those people are good, quote unquote, good in themselves. And the sage would also believe in people, whether or not they have the same belief in themselves. So these 2 together make up 德性, virtuous character. It's actually very powerful when it is done properly, when it's done in a natural way, in accordance with the Tao. To illustrate that, what we did last time was to utilize a historical account. Guan Bao zhi jiao, the friendship of Guan and Bao. These are 2 historical figures, and these date back to a little before the time of Lao Tzu. So these people predated Lao Tzu by a few centuries in the spring and autumn period. So what we talked about in the story was the belief that uh, Bao Shuya had in Guanzhong. So these were friends who grew up together. And even though people looked down on Guanzhong, the man to the left, because he came from a poor background, he had a faithful defender in his good friend from childhood, Bao Shuya. So at the end of the story, and as recorded by history, Guanzhong was able to go on to achieve great things, validating, confirming the belief that his friend had in him. So the takeaways from that particular story is again about the virtue of goodness. Bao Shuya, in this case, saw the good in his friend Guanzhong because he knew him from childhood. He also had an unwavering belief in him, knowing that he would go on to do great things. And this went against what everybody else thought. So when it came time to recommend his friend Guanzhong to the king, he did so without hesitation, even though the king was extremely skeptical. So out of that story, there are two most important questions to ask that will illustrate the essence of the lesson that we're talking about in this chapter. So the first question has to do with having someone in your life who believes in you to that extent. This could be a mentor, a teacher, parents, relative, good friend, could be anyone. So having someone like that who believes in you so much unconditionally, how would that make you feel? And if you already have someone like that, how does that person make you feel? How would that inspire you to rise up and do more than even what you thought was possible for yourself? So I think if you are like me, you would be grateful to have a person like that in your life. The inspiration from that person, the strength that you derive from someone like that with such a belief in you, that makes you a better person. And it would be hard to imagine being without someone like that in your life. If you do not have someone like that, I think you can easily imagine the power that this person would have on you to influence and inspire you to go beyond what you thought were your limits. That's the first question about another person who has faith in you the same way that this good friend Bao Shuya had faith in his friend Guanzhong. That's the first question. The second question is to flip it around and to think about what if you could play that role for someone else? What if you can have someone to believe in even more than they believe in yourself? What if you know them so well that you can see that they are capable of more and you let them know? This will inspire you. People like that who inspire you would be just as powerful as the way that you would inspire other people when you play that role. Just by knowing them and believing in them. So with these ideas, you begin to see how sages can powerfully influence other people, that just being in the orbit, just being in the surroundings of a real life sage automatically makes everyone better. They bring their A game. They up their game, their standard. They raise the bar. They demand more from themselves. The sage doesn't have to say anything to them. This happens automatically. It seems like the sage influences people without exerting any effort on their part. It would be It's a privilege that I've had. It's an honor that I've had in my life to have witnessed this in action, to have it done to me, to have the inspiration be put on me, to inspire me to be the person that I am today. So I am hoping that you guys have had the same experience, and if not, create that experience for other people in your life. So a powerful lesson that we talked about before. Then let's wrap it up. I mentioned that the last line, the sages care for them as children, it summarizes those points. And now I think you can see that it's so easy to figure out what Lao Tzu was trying to get at. The last example is actually the perfect example to explain exactly what he intended to convey. So think about the mind of a loving parent. We talked about this previously. You know, the loving parent is going to be kind and treating the child well, and it doesn't matter if the child is misbehaving. The parent loves the child just the same and will be treating the child well, giving the child a lot of love and support, regardless of the temporary behavior of the child. And this is because having raised the child, the parent knows the child's basic, essential goodness. And it is also easy to see that the parents will definitely believe in the child. Now, the child may be lacking in self-belief, may not be very confident, may not be very self-assured. It doesn't matter. The parents believe in the child just the same. The parent knows that the child has tremendous untapped potential. So these behaviors, these patterns, we see all the time in parenting, in loving families. So what the Tao says, what Lao Tzu says, is that you can take that same pattern of human behavior and apply it more broadly on all people. And that's what the sages have done. They, quote unquote, treat everybody as if they are children. Specifically, it's not to baby them or coddle them. It is to believe in them and to see the goodness in them. So then the challenge for us is to do what the sages do. So what I've done is that I've created a diagram that I hope will convey the idea visually and make it easy for everyone to see. Let me present it to you. Tao Sages and the people. Now remember, if you aspire to be a Tao Sage, you have to start acting like a Tao Sage. You have to emulate what the Tao Sages do. So in this diagram, I put the Tao Sages on top. The Tao Sages interacting with people representing by these lines that radiate out. Now, the people that Tao Sages come into contact with are all kinds. They come in all shapes and sizes. Some are good, some are bad or judged by society as bad. Some are faithful, some are faithless. And these are broad categories, and I'll talk about them in turn. The good will be those that at least make an attempt to follow the Tao, know about the Tao, maybe they call it by a different name. They aspire to be better. The bad are not rotten to the core, but are merely the ones who have strayed from the path. So it is always possible, because of the essential goodness in all mankind, for the bad, quote unquote, to come back around, to get back on the right path. Faithful. So this one, the faithful and faithless, is actually covering multiple concepts in the original. As you can see here, those who believe or are trustworthy, those who can be believed, those who are deserving of trust, etc. Faithless, those who are lacking in belief or trust, or perhaps are not trustworthy. So one thing to note as you're looking at this right here, in the interaction between Tao Sages and all kinds of different people, the good, the bad, the faithful, the faithless, is that the sages work for the common good in society, not for themselves. So they treat all people equally with kindness and compassion. And that means the good continue on the path, while the bad are inspired to change their ways. And that's represented in the continuing diagram here. The sage treats them equally well, no matter what. Then, on the right-hand side, the unwavering belief that the sages have in the inherent goodness of mankind, no matter who they are. The faithful are rewarded for their faith, while the faithless are inspired to become trustworthy. And that's represented with this interaction here. The sage believes in them equally with an unwavering belief. The sages know that people can always do better. So you can imagine what these interactions will bring about, at least in the immediate surrounding, in the interactions, in the circles where the sages are present. You can imagine that this results in the Tao, in the sense of peace, harmony, and inspiration. So that's the diagram. This is just another way to represent this particular chapter. I hope this makes it clear to everyone. I think one of the benefits that this diagram has is that when you see it as clearly as this, it becomes super easy to pick up any translation of the Tao Te Ching, flip it open to chapter 49, and to see what the translation is attempting to convey. With such a clear mental image in your mind, you'll be able to assess almost immediately the quality of the translation. So having talked about this, I think we're now ready for the paraphrase of Tao Te Ching, chapter 49. As ever, our purpose is to demonstrate complete understanding by expressing the original meaning with modern language. So I'll go back to the original text, and it is divided into sections. We will paraphrase each section one by one. And when we do this, we don't necessarily need it to be a very accurate, faithful translation, but we need it to convey the original meaning accurately. So the first section there is about constant mind, meaning a dogmatic, unchanging mind, a stubborn kind of mentality. And then the mind of the people, the sages take the mind of the people, meaning the sages will always incorporate multiple perspectives, the opinions of everyone. It's not just their way or the highway. So with that in mind, here's the paraphrase that I would like to offer. The sages are not dogmatic or fixed in their ways. They never assume they know everything, so they always want to know other perspectives in order to improve their own understanding. So that's the paraphrase there for the first section. Let's move on to the second section. As I mentioned, this section is all about the virtue of goodness. And when the sages practice the virtue of goodness, they are good and kind toward everyone, regardless of whether or not those people are good or kind in themselves. So here's the paraphrase that I would like to present. The sages treat all people equally well, without judging them as good or bad. Their conduct is not conditional or dependent on anything other than the Tao. So the sages can bring out the best in people, no matter who they are. This is the powerful virtue of goodness. And as I mentioned, this is what I have seen and witnessed myself in my own life. It's wonderful, it's powerful, it's amazing to see how the sages can effortlessly bring the best out of everybody. Let's move on to the third section. The third section is about the other major point, the second major point, which is the virtue of belief. So I have expressed it as the sages believe in you, whether or not you believe in yourself. The sages know you, so they understand that you have tremendous untapped potential. So with that in mind, let me present to you the paraphrase for this section. Similarly, the sages have faith in all people, whether they are deserving of it or not. They believe in people even when people are unsure of themselves. This inspires people to live up to their potential, to become worthy of the trust. This is the powerful virtue of belief. And that brings us to the final section, the concluding section, where we talk about the sages interacting with the people and how it applies with what I call the virtuous character that the sages apply in their interactions with everyone. So this is the way that I would like to conclude with the following paraphrase. False sages may hide from the world in some sort of hermitage, but real sages get involved in order to be of service. They live among us and they interact with everyone. They know people listen to them and look up to them, so they are especially careful to set a good example. By demonstrating the Tao with their words and actions, they're able to guide people, just like parents nurturing children. And guys, I really cannot emphasize this enough. Right here is a unambiguous, clear message from Lao Tzu about how the sages really are, that they're not far away, they're not in a distant temple. To this day, I still see so many Westerners who have this idea fixed in their minds about traveling to a faraway place, somewhere out in Asia to visit a distant monastery in the mountains or a temple in the mountains, maybe high on some peak someplace, and to study with the master there. Folks, the people who actually live in those locations are human beings just like you and me. I will guarantee to you right now, they don't know the Tao any better or worse than the people who do not live in those faraway places. What they do lack is interactions with everyday people, with society at large. All the challenges, all the friction that can result from that. They completely miss out on that and therefore cannot offer lessons or insights based on such interactions. Only the sages among us are able to do that. That is the conclusion of the paraphrase. So we have just one more thing to go through, and that is the full circle discussion for 49. How do we connect the end of this chapter back to its beginning so we can really get the essence of the Tao? So let's take a look. This won't take long. This is rather brief. In the last lines of chapter 49, Lao Tzu talks about the sages caring for people as children, and that is another way to say demonstrating compassion, demonstrating empathy to everyone. Here is the last line. And the last line basically says the sages care for them as children, them meaning people. So then we connect this back to the beginning, and we can see how this relates to the concept of not having a constant mind. So here's the first line. First line says, the sages have no constant mind. And we're drawing this connection from the end to the beginning. So in sages treating people well, treating people with compassion and empathy, how would it be combined or be guided by not having constant mind? Well, the message here is that the sage's interaction with everyone is fluid and can change from moment to moment. It's not fixed. It depends on the situation. It depends on what people need. Sometimes people need guidance. People need the sage to tell them, here's what to do. Sometimes they just need someone who will listen. This is actually more common than not in my personal experience. A lot of times, people just need someone to listen. So this is how we link the beginning back to the end. You see, the sages will vary their approach depending on the situation, although, as you have seen in this particular chapter, their actions are always guided by the two virtues. The virtue of goodness, being good to people no matter what, no matter how they are, and the virtue of belief, believing people even when they don't believe in themselves. So that is a guide for all of us as well. When we interact with other people, if you emulate the sage, you also want to vary your approach. You also want to not have a fixed mind. You also want to provide them with what they need depending on the situation, and it can change. But as always, your conduct will be governed by the virtue of goodness and the virtue of belief. By the way, just because the sages are kind and empathetic, it doesn't mean that they won't sometimes be exacting and disciplined in treating people. Why is that? Well, it's because it depends. Sometimes what people need is motivation in the form of a swift kick in the pants. That's definitely happened as well. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.